Okay, it's not often we have three-time Super Bowl champions here in this podcast, but there have been a few. James White, Ted Johnson. I will say this, it has never happened before that we have had a guest as shiny and as handsome as yours truly. And this is where we welcome in Devin McCourty, part of the ball gang. Obviously, Devin, your life has gone astray because you find yourself in this rinky-dink podcast. How are things going otherwise?
No complaints, man. I think obviously first year removed from football. A lot of times, I think even for me, as many things that I did while playing and then being done, it was a huge kind of feeling of fear, of like, how am I going to handle this? Am I going to enjoy this? Am I not going to enjoy it? Am I going to be depressed? Am I about to just self-destruct? I think all guys who play, when you get in that first year removed, you have so many worries and concerns. And for me, it was awesome this first year out. I think one of the biggest things that I enjoyed the most is I take my kids to school and pick them up almost every day, other than a few times where I have to leave and do other things. But that was awesome. And I think obviously what everybody sees is, the media stuff, being on NBC Sunday night, getting to work with Westwood One, calling games. So traveling a little bit, meeting people. So the connections I've been able to make. And then, I think obviously being in the studio Sunday and just being right in the middle of like all these games are happening as we're talking, it still gives me that kind of chaos that I loved on Sundays playing the game. So it's really been a blessing to, be able to have that job.
It's funny because, I've heard you say this all before in different forms, like 6 weeks ago. Like the genesis of this podcast was running into you at Gerard's introductory press conference. I'm chatting with Juwan Bentley and Jonathan Jones in the back. You come over, and then, without disclosing anything that was said, there's this like 90-minute clinic from you to them about this is what media is really like. This is how the business works. Guys coming in and out, jobs, secrets that are known but never reported. And their jaws, I think they had to obviously pick up off the floor after you were done because it's something new. And I know those guys dabble in music and some media. So I said, why don't we just do a version of that here? Catch up on how you're doing, what you see, what media is like. I'm curious, your full year, let's just call it a year, since you retired, been in the media. You had a couple lines in the water, obviously a big bite there from NBC. You were pretty familiar with media, not only just because of your time at NBC on and off as a player, go to do the CBS pregame show during the bye week of your final season. Like, you understood it. But what was something you knew even as a player before those media experiences, now that you've been in the media for a year, where you're like, I was right about this all along as far as the business goes?
I think one of the things was just the quality of people. I think I learned that, I think especially playing in New England, where, every day there's 30 to 40 people in the locker room. And then, I talked to other guys like my brother when he was in Tennessee. He was like, dude, like our regular beat reporters, like maybe 10 people, maybe 10 to 15 people daily. So, but I got to build relationships, obviously being on Quick Slants and getting to know Tom and Phil, and then Mike Reese through the years, like Karen, Gura Gregan. Every year, like the same people will come back. And I remember Mike Reese brought his daughter to a bowling event that me and Kyle Arrington did. And he was like, I just wanted to show her that there's guys that play sports or professional athletes or whatever they are, and they're just regular people. They're out here giving back. And that was something that, I think after maybe 2 or 3 years, I realized, like, man, these same people who come and have to ask us questions go home to families. They live normal lives just like we want people to know about us. We need to understand that about them, that they're just trying to do their job day in and day out. And now going on the other side and actually getting to spend even more time with, call it, on-air talent, producers, journalists, just seeing their journey, seeing what they've dealt with, their path that they had to work from the bottom up. For me, has been really cool to see the behind the scenes. And it's something that, like I said, I knew some of the people that were in the locker room were really good people. And it wasn't the questions about football or the game. It would be when we just had downtime, or we would start talking about the game, and then it would jump into something else, and we would start talking about college rivalries or different things like that, that now I fully get to enjoy and not have to worry about talking about the past I got beat on for a game-winning touchdown or something.
Yeah, have we ever talked UConn Rutgers? I don't know. It sounds
No,
like all of our conversations early. Yeah.
yeah, like normal, it wasn't much to talk about. Even like when Shalise was there, she would want to talk about Syracuse, but we just talked about how Rutgers dominated.
Yeah. I'll talk about Syracuse getting dominated anytime. But People, some folks will hear that answer and be like, oh, this is why McCourty came on the podcast. He's saying that thing about the media. I think it's unsaid and understood that like all the people you just listed off, A, I love or have worked with. But B, you highlight because you're not going to highlight everyone, right? Like there are good people in any business, people that maybe you don't want to spend as much time with. Now, what was something you thought as a player about the media? And now that you've been in for a year, you realize you were actually wrong about on this side of the business?
Well, I will say this. I never realized how connected the media was to, call it, front office, coaches, just like that web that is just like transferable information. It's just flowing back and forth. And as a player, we always want like these things would come out like sources. I'd be like, man, like who in the locker room is talking to people? And being now on the outside, I'm just like, man, like a lot of these media people have really close friends in high places, and they get information that way, and they know this and they know that. So that to me, I think I learned more of that towards the back end of my career. But like now being in it and understanding how important it is on relationships and those different things. And I thought it was so funny. Even I had an opportunity. Chris Berman was at practice my last year. And, I was already interested in media. I had a sense that, it might have been my last year. So my whole thing was anytime I got around people that, were legends for me, I grew up watching Chris Berman. I wanted to ask him questions. And I was just like, hey, like, what was the journey? What made you get into it? And I remember he said one of the coolest things is when he first got started and really, taken off, he said, I would just hang out with the guys. He said, it wasn't about me reporting this or this happened or that happened. He said, like, we would just get to know each other. He said, I have some good friends who were some of the best players in the NFL in their era. And we go grab drinks, we go to the bar, and like what happened those nights, those stayed between us. And he said, and that's what it was really about. It was about me, a guy who always loved the game, who couldn't play the game, but got to be around it and report it and talk about it, building real relationships with players. And I think that's something that I'm highly interested in now, being in it as a former player, is having those unique, genuine relationships. And I don't worry about like trying to break news or anything, because I like being behind the scenes and talking to people and understanding guys' stories and how they got to where they are.
How much news could you break though? Just based on what you know now. Like Devin McCourty is plugged in as anyone as far as the Patriots goes, and certain agencies, I think, is the unspoken in between. How much news could Devin break? Are you putting heat on Adam Schefter?
No, not a ton. Could I break some news? No doubt about it. But again, a lot of times when I have a chance to do those things and I talk to people, I won't even ask them that big question because I don't want to be asked the question from somebody else. Like even my wife, I don't want my wife to ask me a question and now I got to debate, do I lie to her? No, I don't want to know. Like if there's a lot of things that I want to know is I want to know who's a guy that I can go on air and talk about. And then in 2 months they come and it's just like, look at this guy, the Puka Nakuas of the world. That's what I want to talk about. I want to understand those stories. The rest of the things that I see that like a guy's not playing good ball, I don't need somebody else to tell me that. I can go talk about that and do what I have to do. But the breaking of news, unless there's a guy that's a good friend of mine and they want to sign a contract extension, I always think that's funny when like you break the news instead of the big dogs, the Shefties and the rap sheets. I always think that's funny when like you're the little guy breaking news because I think it pisses people off. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah. Cosign, as you know, I'm not going to call it a little guy, but you're fighting an uphill battle with those two who've been around. Ian, of course, in New England too. And like, I remember, I don't know, very early when I started, one of the best pieces of advice I got was just, if you want to talk to someone about, say sourced info down the road or get to know the real story, what happened after or before you report, don't talk to them about football for like the first few times that you hang out. Like get to know them as a person. And it might work out naturally anyway. But either way, you got to connect on a different level because that's what builds this trust before you start asking the questions, which, Doug and I just got back from the combine. We have a full list, an hour-long podcast and everything we heard. That's also a fraction of what we know or heard because you got to verify it and there's certain trust that we're building with new people. And I think that's the exact right way to go about
it. Exactly. And that to me is what's been fun is when I get in these rooms, just everyone's just having a good time. You're talking about different things. You get an opportunity, like even for me, like I got the opportunity to go down to Arizona in the off season because of a connection from my brother And I got to talk to their rookies. And then I run into Monty Ossenford, and I'm talking to John Gannon. And for me, like, there's no information to share from there, but like, it was awesome for me just sitting down talking ball because I spent my whole career in one place. So that's all I know. So just being in these other situations, these other organizations, seeing how they operate, seeing what they do, it helps me just from a general football knowledge. And I think that's the thing that I've learned in this first year of it's not about just what's going on in the sport or like being the first to report it or being the smartest guy with the take. It's also about, like you just said, the relationships, knowing more ball. Like that was my biggest takeaway is like, I want to learn more. Sitting in the studio with Jason Garrett and Chris Sims, who both played quarterback, and Jason obviously coached as a head coach, they'll start talking about offense and throwing phrases out. And they'll be like, you know what this one is? And I'm like, no, I don't know offensive terms. If you explain what it is, I'll tell you what we called it, and it makes more sense to me that way. So that for me is the next step. Like I want to start to just learn more ball from an offensive standpoint, how they look at things. So that's the journey that I feel like people don't always talk about because it's not like the sexy thing. But I think it makes you better when you go on air and can understand why guys are doing certain things because you actually understand the system they play in.
Right. All right. You mentioned NBC. You're in there well before you go on air, about 7 o'clock. Pregame show goes to 8:15, 8:20. You're doing halftime, a little bit of postgame. Take us through a typical day.
Actually, it's the best thing in the world. I get picked up. They take me to work. So pick me up, go to work. We get there, I usually get there around like 11:30, 11:45. And I'll start to just look at some stuff that's in front of me, put some thoughts down. And then at 12 o'clock, we do our production meeting where we kind of go over, which is cool about this show. It's not a true run of show because we got to watch all the games. So where the games are going to plug in at and how it's going to work, what we're going to talk about, we have no idea really. Now we try to guess some things of like, this should be the game of the day or this should be that, but we don't know because the games have to play out. And so the 1 o'clock games start, and as the 1 o'clock games are on, it's legit probably 20 to 25 people in the screening room. It's producers, it's graphic guys, it's the on-air talent, it's the PR guy. It's just everybody all in here. It's social media woman, like it's a ton of people, and we're just throwing things out there. Oh, did you see that? Oh, this guy just did that. Oh, they've been in a 5-man front. They're usually in a 4 down, and it's just things and thoughts just running and going out there. And it's cool because a guy will get hurt and Mike Florio might have his head down. And I'm like, Mike, did you see this guy just get hurt? And then we talk about media. He starts texting on his phone. And in like 30 minutes, he gives us an update of like what's live happening in the game. And I'm like, man, are you texting the head train? Like, how are you getting? But it all happens fast. And then those 1 o'clock games wrap up. And my first time doing this, the 1 o'clock games wrap up, and we kind of break up the games and give the highlights to each person before the game starts. So after the game, our head producer Matt Casey goes, "Hey, what do you think about?" I don't even remember what game. What's your input on this? So I gave couldn't stop the run. They ran the ball X amount of times. Like that's what, and he was like, "Yeah, I mean, I could look at that in the box score. Like, what's like, why? Like, why did it happen?" And I'm like, why? I just watched 9 games at one time. Why is impossible? And that was a huge like learning curve for me of like, I'm used to you put me in front of an iPad and I watch a game. I can give you great feedback on what I see, what's successful from a defensive standpoint, what the offense is trying to do. I had never watched all of these games at once. So I had to learn how to get better at that. And then those 4 o'clock, 4:30 games start. We'll see like up until half. Then we'll kind of do another quick run of show and start to put things in place that we're going to really go get dressed, makeup. Then we get in the studio. We might rehearse 1 or 2 things. We're using a clicker or something like that. We'll rehearse it. Then next thing you know, 7 o'clock comes fast and we're live. But the thing that's interesting is when we're live, the games are still on. So like we're live, and every time we go to commercial, we're like looking around the cameras and we're trying to figure out what's going on because we know as soon as that game ends, we're gonna have to break down and talk about that game. And our researcher does an awesome job because anytime he pisses the stage manager off sometimes because like as soon as the commercial he thinks ends, he'll start yelling out what happened. And he's like, we're not clear yet. But it's just like it's so much chaos in there because things are happening in real time. It makes me feel like I'm a part of a 2-minute drill every weekend. And that's been really a satisfying part that I enjoy that kind of chaos. I feel like that's where I do my best.
So a couple of things on that. One, that experience of watching 9 games at once is going to resonate with a lot of folks at home who are either at bar, watching on Red Zone, doing Red Zone, and then the Pats game on another TV. I think they would love to know, how did you get better at watching 9 games at once? Because I also know you're someone who, like you just said, cares about the substance of what's going on, not just the number. But, they were running a lot more gap schemes against his front, and that's why it worked in particular. Like, how did you get better and then maintain that substance part of what your analysis is going to be?
Turn into a player again. It was all about preparation. So instead of just knowing that like I have these games, I prepared. I did breakdowns of I'll watch a game or two because obviously like there's only but so much time in a day to watch every NFL game. But I would start to prepare and watch. All right, what do these teams do well? If I was playing against this team and I had these players, how would I play? So now as I'm watching the game, sometimes I hit the nail right on the head and it comes out. For instance, Buffalo and Miami plays that first game in Buffalo. And I'm like, if I'm Buffalo's defense, what you do best and better than anybody is you disguise. You stay in too high looks all game. So it's going to enable you to pack the middle of the field and force the Dolphins to run outside. And you're going to take your chances saying, yeah, they might make some plays on the edge. But ultimately, like the edge is to set up the middle where they're going to try to take advantage of you once you start trying to get width and take away the outside. And the game ends and like Buffalo has 2 interceptions in the middle of the field. They take the middle of the field away. HN has, I think it was, HN has some big runs outside early in the game. Miami goes up and down the field, I think the first 2 possessions of the game, and then it just stops. Buffalo kind of sticks to their game plan. And for me, I was able to give details because I had already prepared of what I thought how the game would go. And then on the reverse side of it, if it didn't go that way, it was now easier for me to see some of the things they did. Maybe I thought a team that normally blitz, hey, they're going to blitz. And if they blitz this way, it's going to kill, they're going to take advantage. And then that team blitzes and they play great in the secondary. They cover guys up. So now I'm like, all right, I can see that. And I don't have to see in detail what they're doing. I can keep watching as I'm watching other games. I'm like, all right, here's another blitz. Oh, third down, another blitz. So maybe I don't know the entirety of what happened the whole game, but I'm able to pick and choose and say, hey, I saw from this game, third down, they went 3 of 12, and it was primarily because on third down, they blitzed a good amount of the game, and it wasn't just blitzing up the middle. They sent corners, safeties to create that chaos, to rush the passer. So like that for me allows like if a fan's watching, they're like, oh man, I love watching the game back. Like if you're a huge Patriot fan, you might not care about the rest of the league, but you turn it back on and you see some of the third downs, you're like, okay, like that makes sense. McCourty was right, rather than me throw something out there. And then I know I do that when I'm watching. I hear somebody say something like, no, they didn't. Like they barely played man to man today. And like that is what I always want to avoid. I don't care if I have the hottest take. I just want when people actually watch and hear me talk, they're like, yep, that did happen. That makes sense.
I like hearing you say that because I know from my perspective, which is different, right? Like this is my work as well. And I like to get into the nitty gritty, but you can only talk for so long about hand placement and leverage, right? If you're talking about offensive line play versus they, ran it down their throats because it's a little catchier. But there are instances where I think you can have a analysis specific to a game, but the most valuable analysis sticks with you beyond that, a certain talking point or a technique or a coverage you might have learned about, even though you were talking about that Bills-Dolphins game in week 4, that I go, okay, I'm going to look for that the next time the Bills play Miami or similar offenses to Miami. And you said it just for that game. It was just about that game. But it's the analysis that lasts, that matters. And I won't say names, but part of that conversation we had in Gillette was you can tell when ex-players who know way more about football will forget more football than I know right now. Stop watching tape because you hear a lot more of the, we ran it down their throats. They just kicked their ass. They wanted it more. And they're like, I don't know, man. I feel like you cannot play football at less than full speed. It's not about that.
I think I might have talked about that on air one time. Like, does it look like these guys just they're just not playing hard anymore for this coach. And I'm like, what does that mean? You show me what it means that a guy's not playing hard, because people can pick and choose a play where like the cornerback side is jogging, and then I'll say, well, all right, let's go turn on week 1 where these guys are playing hard all out. And I said, we will find a corner jogging backside. I said, but when that kind of messaging starts and that theme comes about, now everyone watches for it, and then it makes it true, when that's not always the case. Like, I played on, again, now my time in New England, I played on teams that were really good. I played on teams that were decently good, and I ended up playing on some teams that were bad. We still played with effort. We still believed we could win. My brother played in Cleveland when they went 0-16. He's always talked about how hard the team would prepare every week. And he said it was insanity. He said, we literally thought we were going to win each week we went out there, and we lost every single time. But like, those narratives start, and then people watch for specific things, and they're like, yep, he's jogging. And it's like, no, like in the game of football, does every guy run 100 miles an hour the whole time? No. The guys that do that, the Max Crosbys of the world, when they do it, it jumps off the screen for a reason, because he looks like he's moving at a different pace all the time. So like, you can talk about that, but I just hate when guys make things up to fit narratives. And one thing that I leaned on more than anything was I lean on the people who are watching, like you, watching every single day. They're watching this one team. So I would go on Twitter and I would find the local beat reporters for big games and different things like that. And what are they saying? What's going on with the team? What's happening? Because everyone in that market, like, they're focused on that team. It's some of the best things you get, some of the best quotes you can get about the players. So I think that's a huge part of the media too, is I don't just lean on what I know. I think there's other people who do a way better job of being a journalist and finding out things and researching things that I know I can learn from. And I try to implement that in a way that helps what I know about football, what I watch on film, and then go from there.
Yeah. First of all, the check is in the mail. Thank you. Second of all, you mentioned a corner jogging, and that's something obviously that comes up on Football Night in America. It's not going to be a happy segment, right? A team that's not playing as much with full effort, whether it's narrative or it's actually happening. Was there an instance where, and anyone who knows you knows you're going to shoot them straight, whether it's in private or in public. You're critical of a player, a team, maybe even a friend, and then you heard back later about like, hey man, what?
I haven't gotten that. Like even the guys like in New England, well, when they played Indy this year in Germany, and we got to go on air, and I'm like, no, you can't take Mac Jones out with 1:58 and put Zappy in. Like, this is losing football. And like, I didn't hear anything back, because one of the things I always think is so interesting is, like, people who are friends, especially like coaches, a lot of times what I'm saying on air is what I learned from them. So like, whether it's Bill, whether it's Matty P, whether it's Brian Flores, like, all of these guys I have a ton of respect for, because I took what they were telling us and I put it on the field, and I believed in it and I executed. And that's why I got to, turn into the player I was. So when I see things happening across the league, that's my stance. That's a viewpoint. It's my thoughts of what I see now, and also all of those teachings. So when those guys do something wrong, I'm like, nah, you know better than that. You taught me we don't do that. So I actually think it's funny when you get to do those things. And so far, no one. But I will say, subconsciously, you do think about it, right? When you talk to different people, you're like, dang, did I say something bad to them? Like, man, they didn't text me back in like a whole day. Are they busy? Are they mad that I said something? So you do think about it. But I was actually at a conference and I was telling somebody that, and they were like, you've lived your life the right way. I think that people understand and know you enough to know whatever you say something, they know your intentions, what you believe in. He says, so like, you can't think about those things. You just keep working hard, doing what you're doing, and continue to foster and show love to all of those relationships you built. So that's something I'm trying to make sure I continue to do.
Right. That's trust, right? That you're going to be authentic. You're going to be real. You're going to be honest about that. And I think, I can relate in a little small way to say, the players or agents or coaches that you get to be friendly with, and they may or may not develop into sources, you have to guard against that kind of bias. Or, when they drop a pass at the end of a game, you're not going to be as hard to them because you got the BS for 5 minutes in the locker room on Friday. No. And that's why my pitch, speaking to guys behind the scenes always is, look, here's my number. if you ever want to read me out or just call, do it. Like, let me know. And you're not always going to agree with what I have to say, but you have the access to me that I'm hoping to get back from you, which is really any relationship. Like, it has to start from that trust. But what you're doing now is not building trust with people behind the scenes. You're trying to build trust with millions of people you've never met before on the other side of TV.
Yep. And Chris Sims told me that a lot because he has some really strong relationships with people that he's known for a long time. Like, I mean, Kyle Shanahan was his roommate. So like when he says things, he's like, sometimes he'll get a text message from somebody like, come on, man, like, what are you talking about? And he said, I'll bite right back at them. And I'll be like, what do you mean what I'm talking about? I'm talking about this. And he'll send him a clip or he'll say something that came up or he'll give his take. And he was just like, yeah, like he was like, that's gonna happen. And he was like, sometimes you can't prevent it. But he said I think people always respect it if they know that you have something or you can back something up that you said. Like if you say something, you didn't just throw it out there for people to think you're cool or to try to get clicks, but you actually have film, you actually have different stats or whatever it is that back up what you say. He was like, people will always respect that. So that was like some real good advice I got when I first started at NBC.
Yeah. All right. You have been named NFL Media Commissioner for a day. You get 2 to 3 things you get to change how the game is covered, whether that's the writers, people on TV, people doing stupid podcasts like this one. The 2 or 3 changes that you make or the rules that you enact are what?
So the former player in me would say, rule 1, no media in the locker room. All media will go somewhere else. Let guys fully get dressed. Let guys not feel like when they walk out the shower, people are staring at them. That's the former player in me. The media in me doesn't care about it, but the former player in me was like, let's get rid of this. The media side of me is more access to guys during the game, like the preseason vibe to things, and not as frequent because guys are in the game, but let's get more interaction. Let's not just get the coach give us that nonsense 2 minutes like before, right before the half and then after the half going back and forth. Let's grab the quarterback real quick and say, like, what did you see right there? And I know like other leagues as they come up, they try to like implement that to make them a little different from the NFL. But I think from a fan perspective and media standpoint, I think it would be awesome to get like some really cool feedback in game of you just have like this winning drive. And instead of you getting like the whole rest of the game and the 10 minutes you get to cool off, like what if we got these cool sound bites right as guys like come off, they celebrate, and there's 2 minutes left, and the offense did what they had to do, and we grab Patrick Mahomes real quick, and it's like, what a drive. How does it feel right now? And he has all these feelings because all he hopes is the defense gets to stop. Like, I think that would be pretty cool, probably super unrealistic, but if you're going to let me be commissioner, that's something that I would do. I think that's it. I think I would be pretty content with that right there.
I like it. We saw it in the NFL, like you mentioned, guys coming off the field. You get to hear the play call in the headset, which, look, if we're being honest at home, no one knows what the hell that is. It might as well be Mandarin. We're going
I don't know what any offensive call is. Like I used to tell Josh McDaniels, like, why do you have calls so long? Like, who wants to hear all of that and then try to figure out what their part is? And I said, no wonder guys mess up so much on offense compared to defense. Plays are too hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus they're, slower, dumber, not as handsome if they're playing offense than defense. I've heard you say that before.
Yeah, I mean, they care about how they look more divas on offense.
Yeah. Well, okay. I have one idea, and I need to run this by you because you're at the center of this idea. And it answers also the question, what is Belichick going to do this upcoming year? It sounds like he's batting around some TV ideas, which Steve told your friend Chris Long on Chris's podcast. I've pitched this before. Let me know what you think. I want the Bellicast on Peacock, where he is watching your Sunday night games, sitting on the couch like the Mannings, but he's going to need a little bit of help, a little bit of juice, someone to bring the energy when it's, 30-10 and the Cowboys are kicking the Giants' ass again. And the person to do that is you, someone he trusts, someone who's smart, someone who's been on TV before. So whether it's you and J-Mac or just you and Bill, the Bellicast Peacock exclusive Sunday Night Football, what do you think?
I would sign up in a heartbeat. For one, because he would be the guy as we're watching the game. All he wants to do is talk about why something works or why it doesn't work. But the cool part about him doing that would be someone continue to pull out the storytelling. Like him just telling these stories. Yep. Like the best part to me about the Bellicast would be the 30-10 game. Yes, the intense game, the back and forth is what we enjoy, and he would get to break down a game-winning drive or a game-winning strip sack. But imagine like the whole fourth quarter, the game's out of reach, and we just start rolling the whole Rolodex of like asking him questions and not like the controversial, like, oh, Spygate, and like, no,
No.
like throw all that stuff out there. But we just go into Bill Belichick starting off his coaching career in Detroit. Like, what was Coach Belichick's first day coaching like? What was it like being out there in the first preseason game? What was it like the first time you won a Super Bowl? Like, yeah, I got to be a part of you being a super a-hole to the whole team after we won the Super Bowl to get us ready for the next season. But like, what was it like for Coach Belichick when he won his first Super Bowl and then that whole next week or two? Was he already locked back in, or did he turn into a human for a week and just have like the time of his life and enjoy it? So I just think of like all of the cool stories that like him, for one, I think him and Nick Saban in a podcast atmosphere where they're just freestyling,
Yeah.
people would tune in and I think I don't care how they talk or the energy, you would just be so locked in because you're like, how did we deserve these two guys in football, for one, already being friends? And then if they just sat down, and then especially if they sat down with like their favorite wine or their favorite alcoholic beverage, like something that just made them human, just brought them back to just like your uncle that you love going around the cookouts or the family reunions where once you had like two or three drinks, you knew the best family stories were rolling out. Like I just picture Nick Saban and Coach Belichick just like Bill and Nick just having the time of their life.
And if I know Bill, which isn't to say well at all, but the drink is going to be one of two things: sweet tea, or you'll have a very light beer, which would take a couple. But then I'm worried. Actually, I'm not worried because Peacock could be a place where the language is safe. I do feel like the longer he goes into a game like that and the more that go down, like anyone else, the language gets a little bit looser. It's almost like you're in front of the
We would, we
meetings you
would
guys
definitely
used
have
to
to
have.
watch his language. That language can get really bad.
Yeah, but look, when he wants to turn it on for TV, and everyone saw this on game day for one segment, the
Yeah.
storytelling, the energy, the one-liners, he can do it all. So I hope he lands somewhere. And look, if the Bellicast takes off and it is on Peacock, I'm going to ask for my tiny 0.32% cut. All right.
Well, if it does as well as it should do, we'll have no problem cutting that to you. We'll be living high on the hog.
Yeah, good. You'll have my $5 at least, or $6 or whatever Peacock is per month. Now, speaking of Belichick, I know because we texted about this before, you're caught up on the Dynasty and there are 6 episodes in. I've seen the last couple. And I think when we get to that point, folks are going to make a lot of something that you and Matthew Slater had to say around 2016, as far as the protests went and Bill's letter to Donald Trump and everything that went out. And again, people who know you are going to say, that's him. He's shooting you straight. Hearing you and Matthew back to back is something that was a little jarring. So I'll say this. One, what did you make of the first 6 episodes? Or is there anything ahead of time when we get to this in what's now about a week and a half that you think people should know as far as that interview went and what you said and what is the most important thing you wanted to convey about that time?
Well, I think the interesting thing, my wife said to me, we actually just caught up yesterday, and she's like, is it weird watching yourself? I was like, it's weird because I interviewed with them probably like 6 hours or 7 hours. So I said, as I'm watching, I don't remember what I said. I said, like,
Okay.
there were so many different topics that we were talked about. And obviously, I mean, they interviewed everybody for a long period of time, and then they had to cut this whole thing down. So I will say, starting off what you talked about in 2016, I thought it was a very interesting time period. I think, especially for me and my career, with all of the off the field things, it was kind of like a transition into really developing like who I was as a person when it comes to standing up or standing for what you believe in, even if it's contrary to what other people believe in, whether that was at the time with Donald Trump, whether that was RKK, Mr. Kraft, whether that was Bill, whether that was Tom, whether that was Jules. Like we had so many different things going on, and like between me and Chris Long doing so many different things, being outspoken about not going to the White House or the things we believe in. And then knows my relationship with Slate. So all of those different things we talked about, I think as a player and as a man was so conflicting as we were trying to navigate it. And I think both of us kind of operated and moved on who we are as people more than anything else. I think we believe that ultimately we were doing the right thing. And for me, I got to see the full circle moment of all of that when we got to help Will Allen get out of prison because his sentence got commuted. And I still remember when I presented to the team, the first hand that went up was Coach Belichick. How do we help? Like, what do we need to do? How do we help? And this was a guy when I first got to the team was like, football, football. If it has to do with football, we're about it. If it doesn't, put it in a draw. We'll do it another time. And to even think that he would let me present to the team and do these things that we were doing weekly, and then to volunteer and be like the first name on the list to do that, I think speaks to what we really were able to do in that building. I don't know if the documentary will convey like the full circle moment. I'm sure it will convey the tough part about us figuring and doing what we did. But so far, I will say this: I really, and I want to see the whole thing before I have like very strong opinions. I really enjoyed like the first 3 or 4 episodes because I wasn't a part of that. So like I got to see some of the behind the scenes things, and I've learned some of those things from being around people. Even the Spygate thing I think was interesting to me. I don't know if we needed as much coverage of it, but it was interesting to me because it did talk a little bit about like this was going on around the league where everybody kind of knew people signaling like, did they do it the wrong way? Yeah, by the letter of the rules, there's no doubt about it. But I thought it gave a little bit of more of a behind the scenes of like what was going on. And I thought, and obviously the last episode 6, with seeing Hernandez and everything about him, I will say this: my instant reaction from watching that episode was I thought Deion Branch did a phenomenal job of like just talking about it. And from being there, I knew like how much time Dion and Chico spent together, how much time they would hang out because their houses were across the street. I will say I thought Brandon Lloyd had a little too much input on something that was just 1 year in the team on the team, like how well he knew him. And that was my thing why like I wasn't on the episode as much because I just felt like I didn't know a lot about those other things. So I didn't want to be the guy that comes on and says like, well, this one random story that happened one time meant that he was going to be involved in murders. Like, no, like we can talk about some of those things that happened with other players, whether it was like I saw like if a guy's talking about he would get mad and curse people out. I could give you a long list of individuals in that locker room that not like a time or two blew it, but like on the regular could be a-holes to certain people and curse them out for no reason. I don't think that correlates to being involved in other things. So I thought obviously you needed to address it. I would have loved to see episode 6 include more of like Matthew Slater came, then Julian Edelman came, then myself, then Gronk, Spikes. Like all of these guys came as like we were growing up as kids watching what those other guys did. And now we got there and we felt like this immense sense of pressure of like, you guys aren't as good as those guys. That's all we ever felt like being in that building. And I think that was a lot of motivation for us to stick together and try to go win Super Bowls with having 12 on the team.
Do you think the depiction of your time there, which again just began episode 56, has been accurate, has been well represented as far as what was important at the time, and then what was the feeling in the locker room and around the team?
Kinda like again, the Hernandez situation when that happened was the biggest thing. Like there was no avoiding that. I remember I was one of the guys to start training camp that had to go talk to the media. I remember how nerve-wracking that was as like we're talking to the media about like a murder trial. Like that was a huge deal. But I think some of the other things of like getting and falling short was the biggest football issue that we had as players. Like we felt, like I said, we felt bad, especially for like Tom, Vince Wilfork, like these guys who, when I came in, was like feeding us how to win Super Bowls, what it takes, telling us stories about Ty Law, about Rodney Harrison. Like they were feeding us all of these stories, the Willie McGinnis's, and the Matt Light was there in the beginning of my career. Like Kevin Falk sat next to me. And like these guys were feeding and telling us all this stuff. And we felt like, all right, we got to go do this now and then. Like with Vince and Tom being here, like we got to get these guys another Super Bowl. So I felt like that was a huge part. And I felt like at times it felt like it was always us versus the older guys. It was like the 2000s Dynasty versus whatever we were at the time. And it was just like we had to we always had the feeling like we had to do it and represent ourselves, because whether somebody that was from the first dynasty was doing media and they said something about our team, like we all always took that stuff personal. As like, yo, did you hear what they said about Hightower? Did you hear what they said? Nah, let's like we always had that kind of energy. And I remember being at Ty Law's induction, and we were just talking about it, and it was like, and I think like Willie McGinnis knew as we were talking, like, yeah, these guys want their third ring. Like they want that third ring. They want, and obviously we wanted to get 4 or 5, but the 3, at least all of us that now are done and retired felt like, all right, we put our name up there too with those guys. And I felt like that was a huge storyline. And I don't know if it's going to hit more of that as it goes on, but that was huge for me.
So just to clarify, was this a healthy kind of, my word would be divide or a pressure that you felt as like the competition brings out the best in you? Or was this kind of, a separation in the locker room? Like clearly in the cafeteria, the 2000s guys were sitting over here and we're the 2010s freshmen looking over being like, what are they saying about us?
Yeah, like if there's no doubt, like if we were all in there together, I think that would be the ideal thing of like, for one, we didn't feel like, especially as a player there, everyone always will refer to you as the Super Bowls that were won before you. And I think I was always adamant, like, that's not us. Like those guys deserve and have earned that respect for what they did for this organization. Like this isn't like other things like Mr. Kraft, Bill Belichick, Tom Brady. You want to talk Super Bowls? That's them. But the rest of us, we didn't earn the right to talk about what goes into championship teams. Like we didn't know. So
Yeah.
it was a super healthy competition where it was like, it was us versus them. We want to get to where they got. And when we won one, it was like, oh no, we really want to get there. Now that we know what it feels like because of guys like Matt Patricia, Matty P. I remember him telling me, well, you get that trophy in your hand and it's coming. Like I vividly remember him talking about that. So once we got it, I think we came in together around, we call it 2 or 3 years, and we formed this bond of we want to be the next group of guys that goes and wins Super Bowls for this organization because we have the greatest quarterback and we have the greatest head coach. We want to fill those gaps. We want to take off. And it was 10 years in between. And it's cool now being done to look back and realize as we were all coming together, scrapping it out in practice and trying to figure things out, to say like, I lasted that whole time throughout all of that and became best friends with guys. And we formed together to do something that was super special. It's an awesome feeling.
For sure. Just because I brought it up and I want to wrap up and move on to something new, the episodes that are upcoming that I mentioned, that you and Slate go back to back in a way that's critical of Bill, and Slate uses the word hypocritical as far as the letter and the Trump campaign. They do not come back to the full circle moment that you alluded to when you're making a presentation in front of the team about non-football stuff. And I think that speaks to what has become a common sentiment among folks like me that have gotten advanced copies of the Dynasty, and some folks who have even just seen episodes 3 and 4, maybe part of 5 and 6, that Bill gets a bad rap. I tend to agree. Now, I want to stress to everyone, I think you should watch the doc in its entirety before making strong impressions. That's why I'm waiting to write about these until the end. And it's a bummer. Now, the fact that Bill, I think, connected with his players much better towards the end of your career, and speaking with you and other people about it, is important, because that lack of connection probably spoke to a divide in the locker room, maybe between the staff and higher-ups, what happened in 2016, and eventually bridged some of that. But they do not mention it. The other thing I'll say is this. This is not supposed to be a highlight reel for like the best Patriots moments of the last 20 years. They're talk a lot about Spygate and Aaron Hernandez, and Deflategate is coming up here soon. I do think, though, when you're writing or making a documentary about a dynasty that was clinched with a second and third Super Bowl, the famous call is, yes, it's a dynasty from Gil Santos. 5 seconds on that, and the hiring of Bill from the Jets, which kickstarted all of this, is totally glossed over, were huge mistakes in my mind, because That's why it was a dynasty. That's why you had those early 2000s guys. They were made men by those second and third Super Bowls, even if this is not going to be something for a local audience in New England that just wants to relive the happy memories, but a national one who remembers all of the things and scandals I just talked about.
Yeah, and I think I remember even talking to the director, and he was stressing how hard it is because he said this isn't like the dynasties that are like 10 years. He said this is 20 years of like we're trying to figure out what moments to put in to 20 years, whereas like we have this one group of guys who have a phenomenal story of getting to the top, winning back to back, doing. He said, and then there's a gap, but like in that gap is the perfect season. So yes, there's no Super Bowl, but how do we not talk about the perfect season? And then 2010 comes, and then 2012 to 13, he was like, you guys lose the Super Bowl in 11. You go to AFC championships. You don't win in the Super Bowl. Like in the smack in the middle of that is Aaron Hernandez situation. So like in a normal situation, we might only give that, a short amount of time and then move over to the Super Bowl in 2014. But it's like, that's such a huge thing. So I definitely understand. I think how hard that is, but I think also as the viewer, our job is to watch and be critical and say how it makes you feel, say your opinion. So I'm excited to see it all the way through. I was kind of angry. I'm like, all the players, we did all of this, and I'm a media member now, and all of the media got it, and like nobody, like, where's my copy? Why didn't I get the copy sent to the media? Like, I have a media email. Send it to my email, my media email, not to my former player guy email. So I'm kind of angry, but I am enjoying being in lock and step with everybody else that's watching from a fan standpoint.
Well, that's a phone call away, though. I mean, Devin, you have friends in media. I've had friends in media for a while. If you really wanted this, you could have called any number of people, not even.
Yeah, but then I got to get the forwarded email. That's not really meant for me. That's just a forwarded.
Okay. You want this on a silver platter. You want this gift wrap with a bow on it, maybe
I want to earn the right to watch.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. You mentioned going out to speak to the press and that being nerve-wracking around Aaron Hernandez. This is, 2012. Completely understand that part. On a lighter note, what was your least favorite question that you got regularly from us here on the beat?
It was always the questions that I felt were like the dumb question that whoever asked it would like give me the look of like my editors looking at me like I have to ask this. Like if we lose and there's like a busted coverage on a play, like what happened? I'm not going to tell you what happened and say this guy messed up and this is why they scored a touchdown. I'm never going to say that. Like for me, it was always the obvious questions. I always enjoyed when like someone knew, like, all right, if I ask him this question straight up this way, I'm going to get the check because I did ask the hard question, but I'm not going to get the answer. I always appreciate when someone was like, hey, I'll go the kind of around the what's the name way and maybe talk about, hey, when you blow a coverage like that, how much is that is due to not really being prepared for something that you saw in the play? Was this play expected? Was this something that you guys shouldn't have messed up on? Because then I felt like you could find a way to get an answer to something else that dove into it, and maybe that player would kind of go into it rather than like the game ends and everyone sees the play. And sometimes like I wouldn't even be involved in the play, but it was like, all right, we're going to ask McCourty because maybe he's going to tell us which corner messed up on the play or which guy was supposed to have this responsibility. And I always thought there's a better way to like be creative to get more out of guys. And I hate saying that because there's no dumb questions, but I always
there are lots of them. Yeah.
I always felt like even sometimes I would do radio interviews and guys would ask things, and sometimes it would be even like guys who played in New England, and it would be like, come on, like when you were a player, you wasn't going to answer that. So I'm not going to answer that. So rather like me give this super boring interview on the radio, like let's talk about things that like if I'm driving in my car at 7 a.m., I think it's pretty cool to hear Devin McCourty tell a story about something. But I think especially for the beat reporters who are there every single day, it's the same thing when different people ask Bill things that he then goes on for 10 minutes because they fully understand, all right, he's not going to give us a good enough answer. And I laugh because at the end of the year, people were ripping reporters for not like going hard at Bill with certain things. I'm like, those people are there every day. They fully know they can ask him one of these questions that everybody wants to hear, so it gets on tape. But he's gonna not only like not answer, he's gonna say no, and then just pause.
Yeah. Right. And there's a lot that goes into it. And I'll say, look, media do a perfect job every single day. No, and sometimes not even a very good job that particular day. But there are questions that puts the onus on whether it's you or it's Bill to at least be on the record about something. I might have 99.9% certainty you're not going to give up an answer, or Bill might not. But I can't control that. I'm not in your own head. We have to say, hey, you give up a game-winning touchdown, Dev. It's not going to be fun for you. Doesn't really matter because this is business. What happened? But to your point about like, hey, please tell us how Kyle triggered too early and you guys were in quarters and that was his deep fourth, whatever. Like, that's not going to happen. But we can ask, did that call surprise you? Did you rep against it? So then we know, okay, it was an execution thing, which to answer my own question in a different way, my least favorite answer, it's just execution. If we fix the execution, we'll be much better. It's like, well, yeah, if I just speak English, I'll be able to talk louder. Like, duh, of course. But sometimes it is a preparation issue versus execution. And that's why we try to phrase it as much as we can in a way that will get more information to inform the people back home.
And that's why I've always felt like when someone asks a question in a certain way, because then like to me, you step on the other side of like, I'm about to ask this question as like a football mind. So now it kind of, I always felt like as a player, it kind of like put my like gates up down just a little bit of like, okay, we want to talk a little ball here. All right, we can get into this a little bit. And I think it's a tough line to balance because you don't want to like go into the nitty gritty of football and then you say something that's like totally wrong. And then a player tries to annihilate you on there and explain to you, well, that's not how the coverage works. But I do think like, I know oftentimes like Phil Perry will text me and be like, hey, I saw this play. Am I wrong? Like, is this cover two? Is this? And I always think that's so interesting because in the same way, when I see something like I text Henry McKenna this year because he covers a lot of stuff with Buffalo. And I understood that. And I'm watching a film and I see something. I'm like, hey, am I crazy thinking this? Like, what have you seen throughout the whole season up there? What's been going on? And I think all of those things go hand in hand because like I just said, I think the way that question could be asked is terrible or something. And you're like, well, you got to be on record asking because it puts ownership on the other person. That's something that I might not think of right away. And I think that's why I've enjoyed having real relationships to text people and ask questions because I think you get the best of both sides in that argument. Now, I might be the guy that asks a dumb question because I'm on the other side. But when as a player, I'm like, this is dumb. Why would they ask me this? Like, and then I learned how to like keep my cool and give that answer you just said. I always feel like, well, it's a dumb question. Well, I'm going to say this. Well, we just need to execute. If we just execute better, everything will be better.
Can't tell you how many times we've heard that. And sometimes it's fair. And we know where you're coming from, right? Like the spotlight is never hotter because then it was the Dynasty Patriots. Bill is in charge, ever powerful. You're going to get called in the office if things happen wrong. And I know guys were threatened, maybe not Devin McCourty level roster, but to be cut based on things they had said to the media. And so you just don't want to cross Bill in that way.
And last thing on that, and one of my biggest fears always as a player when I did that was making another player or a coach feel like I threw them under the bus was more important to me than even like Bill. Like obviously with Bill, but I always felt like once you're there for a while, you're like, man, who knows what he's going to get mad at what you say to the media. Like, I don't know. But like, I never wanted somebody to read something and be like, damn, D-Mac just kind of like threw me out there to the wolves. Like that was always my biggest fear.
And I think, too, what you're subtly speaking to in the way that I look at things, because this is the clearest way to separate media today, is the old quote, be curious, not judgmental. Is this quote coming from a curiosity standpoint? Phil wants to know, is this 2 trap versus Tampa 2 or whatever he might have texted you? Or I'm asking about, was this a preparation thing versus an execution thing? Or I think this sucks. Give me a quote. Talk about how much this sucks. Like affirm my judgment, my bias, my hot take. That's not advancing anything. It's just putting a label on it and turning the volume up. I want to do journalism where you're asking questions which stem from curiosity and things like that, which, look, we all have to do other sides of this, whether it's a radio interview. You can't be doing nuts and bolts of just the footwork, when you're in the flat and kind of eyeing number two and trying to trap that little out route. Like, they're going to hang up.
I hear you studying the game. I hear it.
See, that's what I'm saying. It's like, I can't do a full podcast as much as I've done just the film breakdowns, talking to myself and having a beer alone on Monday nights, which there were many beers, Devin, after this Patriots, because those are the film podcasts. But the point is, at least that comes from a point of curiosity. I want to learn more. I want to advance this. I want to teach people and maybe entertain along the way, where some folks just want to get in. It takes, and it's a very lucrative business, and we all do a little bit of both. Yep. But it sounds like you could tell at least where that person was coming from, kind of based on the question.
Exactly, and I think that's the thing. I think longevity in this game comes from studying the game, helping people when they walk away from watching you. They're like, wow, I learned something about the game of football that I did not know. A hot take to me, yes, you're going to get people because everybody has a hot take, whether you work in media or you're just a normal fan. So, yes, someone will love you because your hot take matches their hot take. They'll hate you because your hot take doesn't match theirs. But I think the person that walks away feeling educated loves the game, so they're going to always watch it no matter what, because they enjoy the game of football more than they enjoy anything else. And they're going to want to come to you because they're like, man, I've been watching this guy for maybe 2 years or 3 years, and I've learned more about the game of football, not just from a position standpoint, but I've also learned about the X's and O's or strategy. And that for me was a gift of being in the meeting room with Bill Belichick every day, because he didn't just talk about offense or defense. Like in our squad meetings, we got the philosophy of the game of football back in the 60s, the 70s, like the 80s, like all the way from like way back, all the way to present day. He would somehow, because I got to be there for 13 years, I would hear how the game evolved, the different changes. So very unique perspective sitting in those meetings with him.
It's one of my favorite stories I've ever written. And it was my first year, media night, Super Bowl in 2018. You guys were playing the Rams, and those meetings I had heard little tidbits about the history of Soldier Field. And it's funny because we bring up stuff to Bill that might be from past meetings. Like, you played the Jets last year, they ran this particular RPO. How are you going to handle it? Well, last year was last year. We're just focused on this year. Lo and behold, he's going 100 years back in time to tell you about the sod that was laid for the first Bears game. Not exactly relevant to today's game, but it's important to him. And getting the perspective from Slate, I remember talking to Dietrich Twice, probably talked to you a little bit about this. What did you learn and appreciate? You guys played the Bears that year, the Steelers on the road, about those lessons and how deep he goes. It was just fascinating calling him kind of Professor Belichick, which the starting point of this was, he used to play this game with Steve when Steve was a kid and they were living in Cleveland. He's in the backseat. Brian and Steve would have these football cards. He says, okay, give me the height and weight of the player, the year they were drafted, and the college they went to. And they would try to stump Bill, driving wherever, sometimes to Canton down from Cleveland. And Steve, who I'd spoken to maybe once, just offers us up at the end of media night. I'm like, this is so cool and unbelievable. And the kind of curiosity point that we're kind of speaking to, because the man loves football more than anything else.
I would love to play that game with him and Ernie and just see how many times we could catch them. Like, I just feel like those two guys, you put them together, like they will, I don't know, I feel like they would bat like 98%. Like, I remember
have to throw in a fake player like UConn in 1923, yes. 6'3", 200 didn't exist.
It's like there's no UConn.
Yeah, right, exactly. We'll do it on the Bellicast.
Yeah, like Vince would come in and be like, Ernie, give me your top 5 defensive tackles all time. And Ernie would like start to think, he'd be like, Vince, I got to get back to you. And one time I'm in there sitting eating with Vince, Ernie comes out of nowhere and starts diving into this top 5. And it was remarkable. He didn't just give you the names, he's telling you why, like it was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Do you remember anyone that Ernie ranked or Bill ranked top 5, top anything?
No, I just remember Ernie put Vince in it. And it was so funny when he said Vince's name. It was hilarious. He said, Ernie, you put me in there? Well, Vince, yeah, you deserved it. So that was really cool to see.
I love that. All right, a couple more and we'll get you out of here. Free agency coming up next week. I know I've talked to certain guys. You know, it depends on the leverage you have, position you play, whether you want it or not, how you feel going into this process. But the term that comes back to me that surprised me was anxiety. You don't know where you're going to live. You don't know how much you're going to make, whether teams want you or not. You dipped your toe in a free a couple times. I always came back to New England. You took a visit to Philly that one year. What do people not know about free agency that you would, having gone into the process a few times?
I actually never took a visit. No visits.
You never did?
Mm-mm.
Wow.
A lot got reported that my first time in free agency, like that was like totally false. So many things came out that like I remember I read that like he was leaving and was ready to sign in Philly, and then Bill called him at the last minute and he changed his mind. And I remember reading this, I was like, who created this story? Like, and I love telling stories. And if that was true, I would have told that story a ton of times. But it's just not true. So I always thought free agency was something, me and my brother talk about this all the time, something as a player I'd rather not do, because I would rather, especially if I've had success on the team, I would rather you give me an extension. I never go to free agency. I never have to take the risk on my body to stay healthy, and you just continue to pay me and we move on. But for me, I love free agency because it worked out for me each time, right? I played those first 5 years. I'm thinking, all right, like I've gone to the Pro Bowl, I've gotten the All Pro nod. We just won the Super Bowl, but like Darrelle Revis comes to our team that last year. I get it. We're both in the secondary. I would want to sign that guy too before I sign me. So then going through it and understanding, all right, like I played the whole season. My advice to all guys is, one, read Uncommon Man by Tony Dungy. He has a whole chapter. If you want to just go to the chapter, just go to the chapter on free agency. It was one of the best things that I ever read talking about free agency. He talks about maximizing your worth, but not turning it into just choosing the highest bidder. Understanding where you are at in life. What scheme do they run? Where are you going to live? Does the city fit you? Does the city fit your wife and kids if you're married or anything like that? Who are the coaches? Are the coaches going to be there? Is the general manager going to be there? You might sign, and then in a year or 2 years, they get fired. And now the next general manager, if you play defensive back, doesn't value that. He values the front seven. So like all of those things were the things I was thinking about when I went into free agency. But I felt like I keep talking about earned. I felt like by the team not extending me, which we had very brief conversations my first year. One offer went, one counter, and then that was it. We shut down talks. I knew, I was like, I earned the right to be a free agent. I'm not signing anything until I understand what else is out there, because that will be what my market is. So when I hit free agency, I remember meeting with my agent, Andy, who we were talking about before we jumped on, of looking at all these contracts and being like, all right, this is where we want to be, high end. This is where we feel like we could end up on a low end if things don't go in our favor. All right, and this is where we'll be if we say, hey, we're comfortable with this. And I remember going to free agency and all these things are coming out. And then I remember the legal tampering opens. And I remember the first call Andy makes. And he's like, hey, we have like 3 teams who are at the number that we wanted high end, and some are above. And I knew right from there, all right, well, I'm going to get the number I want. Like either I get that number or I figure out which of these teams is the best fit. I'm not just going to go to the highest bid. And unfortunate for me, I never got an extension, right? 13 years, never ever signed an extension. Well, they turn as extensions, but they all happen after you were able to understand what else was out there. And I've always told guys, when legal tampering opens, if you created leverage where you can listen and then make a decision. Don't let this go on and try to figure out, all right, well, maybe I wanted to know. And it's one thing that I've always hated about free agency is that if you're a top free agent, you'll never get to go and visit somewhere before you have to make a decision. Those teams want to know so then they can do the rest of their free agency. So I think for all of those guys, there's an anxiety because, like, for me, when I was a free agent, me and my now wife, like, we were close. I knew I was going to actually get engaged that summer. So she was in med school and she was trying to match for med programs. And it was like, well, I want to look in the New England area, but we don't know if you're going to be in the New England area. So I remember she had interviewed a school in Connecticut. I think it was UConn maybe. She interviewed at Rutgers. Like, it was all over the place. But I remember like Jacksonville was in there, Philadelphia was in there, the Giants. So like we were just in this area where it was like, well, I don't know. And then like the dark horse was like, maybe get an opportunity to go to Tennessee and play with my brother. So like all of these things were coming up. And I just remember like reading that chapter on free agency. I just looked at every single bucket to try to figure out what the best fit would be. And ultimately, the best fit was always going back into a system I had already had success under a coach that I knew was going to be there. Like all of those things were the most stable there. And it gave me the opportunity to actually make my contract, which to me was the most important thing, not just signing and getting the guarantee money, but where could I actually play out the contract and still have success?
So I was going to ask you about those three teams. You just mentioned a couple minutes ago, Jacksonville, Philly, and the Giants. Is that the answer to my question?
Yeah. And the biggest thing on all of those teams was each coach was on the hot seat. So it was
Mm,
Chip Kelly, it was Gus Bradley, and it was Tom Coughlin. So I ended up going back to New England, and next year, all three of those guys get fired in the job they were in. And that was probably one of my biggest fears is you get to this new place, you love it, but like that new GM, that happened to my brother in Tennessee, right? He's in Tennessee. Um, I forgot the GM's name. I think Webster, something like that. And John Robinson comes in, and Jason McCourty wasn't a John Robinson guy. So, he plays a year, and then a week before the draft hits, free agency's all dried up. The money's a week before. They're like, hey, we're going to let you go. And everybody be like, oh, that's so messed up. But it happens every year. That's how the NFL works. So that was just always something that I knew that no matter how good of a player you thought you were, the next guy that comes in might not feel that way about you, and it gives you a higher chance because you're making big money to get cut. And then we know in our league is when you get cut, it's hard to get back to the salary you were making once you get cut. Everybody deems once you get cut, you should make less than what you made before. And Chris Hope, who played with my brother in Tennessee, said guys should focus on where they think they can play out the whole contract and make the most amount of the money rather than thinking I'll go here, then I go here. Like just make the money that you sign as the biggest kind of gift and blessing you can get.
right. Oh, there's so much there, but we got to look ahead. A couple of free agents you hope the Pats sign, given their needs. Maybe you know anything about guys who are close to re-signing. I know some that are on, I would say, lower profile deals or smaller deals, lower profile players like are probably closer than the guys at the top of the market, outside, inside. What do you want to see?
I think Duggar and Big Mike, I think are kind of must. And I would say Big Mike probably even more than Duggar because you have two holes at tackle right now. So, Big Trent's a free agent, Mike's a free agent. So to me, you get a huge need bringing Mike back, and then now you only need to fill the other tackle spot. Whereas if like you lose Mike, you you gotta try to make a rookie work, maybe a veteran work, but I don't know how deep the veteran class is. Like, do you bring Tyron Smith in, who's an older guy? Do you get Jermaine Illuminor back to play tag? Like it's so many of these variables that I think the thing in free agency is those variables, are they better than what you could have at right tackle right now? If the answer is no, then to me, you kind of like you gotta get that deal done. And I think both of those guys represent what my era was, finding guys who represent what you want in a player who have had success and you keep them. So now you start to build for the next wave that comes in. Now you have those guys in. So yeah, there's some other free agents they can sign out there that could help. I think, depending on what they do at quarterback, I think a guy like Jacoby Brissett could be a good piece to add to have some veteran leadership, especially if you bring a rookie in. I don't know what works out with Mac and with Zappy there, but it just feels like that's the one position that it's been so chaotic, so like just it's been so negative, I would say. It's just the whole position and everything around it has been negative that it just feels like, man, like, is there just new life we can bring in here that'll make things better, that'll help everybody. But I think other than that, I think corner depth would be huge for them. I think Christian Gonzalez going down, I think put a spotlight just on. I remember Bill used to always say you can never have too many good corners just because you always need them. And if you lose one, like early in my career when we lost Aqib Talib in big games, it just crushed us. So I think having that, but I think no matter what though, they need to draft fundamental foundational pieces, guys that no matter what position they play, they end up being some of the better guys at their position, or just guys that really fit what they're doing that they can keep and continue to have. Like, was Julian Edelman ever the number one receiver in the NFL the years he played in New England? Probably not. You probably take, a couple guys over him every year. But was he like just a fundamental piece to what we did year in and year out? Yes. Like, you needed a guy like him in our system every single year. And the years we didn't have him, it created a huge hole. And then Amendola came in, and Amendola played a part in having that role. So I think they have to find the guys that will make them a really good organization no matter what. They have to find that in this draft and the drafts going forward.
Yeah, tentpole players, right, who hold everyone else up, elevate everyone else. So you can go the night before, oh, man, I don't want to cover him, or I don't want to have to block him. Like, and there just aren't many guys like that.
The Logan Mankins, the guys that are going to be there and be that Patriot type of player.
Yeah, culture drivers I've used the term like gravity, like you're tilting a little bit closer to Tyreek Hill, obviously over the top than you would somebody else. Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about Elliott Wolf? Have you crossed paths with him recently? Anything you share? Because obviously he's now in charge, and it looks like he'll be the GM long term, but he will be at least for the next couple of months.
Not recently. I will say always like positive, always when I would talk to him, even like after I signed a deal, I remember him coming and saying like, had great conversations with Andy. It was awesome to work with him. So I think he has a kind of a people side to him. I think even with the players, I think obviously Nick Caserio never held the GM title, but I always thought one of the unique things about Nick was Nick sat in all of the meetings, and like oftentimes Nick and Julian will be going back and forth on something in the offense that like Nick kind of was like a coach, but also kind of like a GM. Like, he just had a vibe and feel to him that I think when I first got there, he was more like Bill, where it was like, all right, you don't talk to Nick. Like, and then I think over the years, I think he loosened up, and I thought he had unique relationships with guys where a lot of times, especially on the offensive side of the ball, he would talk about what he saw and all those different things that I just felt like it made him really a part of not just the next wave of guys that were coming in, but also the guys that were there working every day, that like even when contract negotiations and stuff started, people felt like, all right, well, even if I don't agree, like, all right, Nick's in this. He's in the mud with us. He feels so. I think Elliott, he'll need to create more of that. I think, and obviously I've never been in another organization to know if that's normal in other organizations, but I know I felt like guys felt really good about having a guy in the organization that kind of took that approach.
It's interesting because I've heard the same. It was almost annoying at the combine asking around about Elliott. And these were scouts, these were executives, coaches, agents. They're like, hey, what do you know about Elliott? Universal, great guy, ready for this. And look, that's good news for the New England Patriots. I'm just looking for a little variation other than the smiling turkey sandwich that I was eating every time I had that conversation.
Yeah.
Like, let's spice it up a little bit.
I didn't get to spend much time with him because I think it was even different because I think between him and Matt Groh, Matt was there for a while. Elliott was kind of like the new guy for us veterans that were there. You knew his background and different things like that. But like, honestly, most of us didn't know, like, all right, well, who's doing what? Like, what? Like, nobody knew. And I think that was always the intriguing thing about New England. Like, Elliott came, but there's no like formal introduction. You just know like he's working in the front office.
Yeah, and he's well known now because of the press conference he gave last week at the combine. I'm sure you saw at least one quote about a less hard-ass type of vibe in the building. What did you make of that? I think it speaks to one big change, right? That just is. I didn't take it as a shot at Bill. I understand the people that do. It's the truth, and he understands, having been other places that won a Super Bowl, there are multiple ways of doing winning business in the NFL. But as far as just hearing the quote and anything you've heard about that vibe the last 6 weeks, what do you make of all that?
Personalities. Like I've got a chance to be around Tony Dungy now for a little while. Like, Tony Dungy couldn't be what Bill Belichick was. It's not in his DNA. He's a low-key, quiet, super smart, intelligent guy. So like his system in Indianapolis ran the way he is as a person. And in New England, Bill Belichick is talk about ball, talk for hours. Other than that, like it's not like you're going to get this guy and we're just going to go and we're going to talk about building tables and we're going to talk about kids running around. Like we're not going to be here for 5 hours just going back and forth. Like that's just not in his DNA. It's not who he is. Where I think is now Gerard has always been the motor mouth, doesn't shut up in the meeting room. Like everywhere he's ever been within that building, it was just like he was going on and on. So like you're not gonna get the Bill Belichick, even though he played under Bill and coached under Bill, he can't go be Bill. So I think when you hear those things, it's just a difference in personality. Everybody always talks about what are the best teams that you watch, the team that takes on the personality of the head coach. When you watch the Detroit Lions this year, they were gritty. They were C.J. Gardner-Johnson all in your face. They were Dan Campbell, right? They took that approach of we'll go for it on fourth down. We'll do these different things. Like that is what you take. And I think you see that kind of beam through from both sides of the ball. What I would say the captains of those sides of the ball usually have something that is similar to that coach, whether it's the way they view the game, whether it's the personality. Like those are the things that you kind of see take off. And I think that's what you're going to see in New England. Gerard's personality will kind of be shooting through everybody's pores of how he is. Probably the yelling, the scream, like all of that stuff will probably be at a higher notch. The Jabril Peppers of the world will be screaming and talking crazy from the beginning all the way to the end. And he did that under Bill, but I think now it's going to be even up another notch because Mayo kind of has
it's
that.
bad news for everybody. It's one of those Jersey guys running motor mouth. Like I don't know what the next level is above motor mouth. And I love Pep. This is all in jest, but like when you say nonstop, I'm gonna be in the locker room for 45 minutes a day during the season, and there will constantly be this white noise in the background. And it's just Pep and Pep, which we love. We would rather talk to guys who are motor mouths than just kind of buy the cliche or keep themselves. But I hadn't thought about that.
And I think Pep is a great representation of the Patriots, right? Everybody's like,
yes,
well, you can only be one way. You can. And this guy comes in. If you ever ask him about other places, he'll tell you, like, this is the one place where I feel like I could just be myself. And, like, it's the one place on the outside is you can't be yourself. You can't do this. You can't do that. And the truth of the matter is you can do whatever you would like as long as it fits in to helping the team win football games. And that to me is something that I love when I got to New England, going from college where it was like this one person's mistake impacts all of us. Now we all got to run. It's like, no, that person doesn't want to do what's best to help us win. They're just gone. And my wife got mad because I have a little Bill Belichick in me. We went on vacation. We were playing pool volleyball, and I had a chance to drop some players and bring in some other players I thought can win us a championship. And that is exactly what we did. And the wives didn't like me for it, but I told them, like, I understand when we leave this pool, I want to be your husband. I want to be everybody's friend. But in this pool,
you benched your wife, Devin. And
we're here to do one thing, and it was to win those volleyball games. And that's what we did. And I walked away from the situation. I told my wife, I said, I walk away feeling great because we had a goal. You want to win, I want to win, and you still won because you're a part of me. We won. If we kept you out there, we might have lost, and it would have been a loss for everybody. So that is my coaching style, Bill Belichick, with adults. I coach the little ones a little different, but that's the adult version when all that matters is championships.
How long were you in the doghouse after?
No doghouse. She has to understand. That's pool volleyball. God didn't make her to be the greatest pool volleyball player.
Did J bench his wife?
J-Mac's wife got benched too, and she was mad too. I've known her since I was 19, so she was really angry. But they had to get over it, and I made sure Jay didn't have to take any of it. He got to stay neutral. He was Switzerland. He was in the middle of like, hey, he probably should have kept y'all on the team, but and I was like, yo, go on that side. It's better because when me and him are together, it makes everything last longer. But with them, they're like, see, Jay even agrees, and I'm like, yep. That's why Jay's not a champion like me. He's only one-time champion, and that's what it means.
And I'm sure you don't let him forget that at any time.
Yeah, I mean, guy was a loser most of his career, came over with me, taught him how to be a winner, and now look at him.
Yeah.
Never looked back.
No, he's probably on NFL Network because of you.
Oh, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. That one text I sent to Bill got him his job.
How long? Because I remember that was my first season when J-Mac came over covering you guys, and Bill even still by the end of the year was telling stories of you guys screwing with him ahead of the Super Bowl, and he had trouble. And you guys have different facial hair. Now, granted, Bill's like an older guy, but you had him going or fooled like very late in that first season, right?
The guy mixed us up when we had jerseys on, like 30, 32, and he was still, and as Jay tells it, well, he would just say Devin because like Devin's his favorite. So no matter what, like if we're running up the hill and I'm in front, he's gonna say it's Devin because he assumes it's Devin. But no, but I will say one of the coolest moments, we were in Tennessee and we're about to take the field and we're all taking a knee to do the prayer before we go out. And Bill's just staring at me and Jay, and he's just smiling. And we end up losing that game. But I thought it was so cool because I think he was sitting there and like, man, like, look at these two guys. Like, they're getting an opportunity to play together on the same team. And we're back in Nashville, Tennessee, where Jay has all this pent-up aggression because they cut him. And he was like, and they're about to attack this together. And I think he sat there and was like, this is no different than me sitting, taking a knee, and him looking at Steve and Brian and getting an opportunity. Right. And I always thought he valued that. Even though we never talked about it, I always had a sense that he enjoyed being a part of bringing us together to play together, even though we won the Super Bowl and that made it even better. But I think even without that, I think he enjoyed seeing us as a family, our kids being in there, our mom coming. I think he really enjoyed seeing that and knowing that he had not just a part, he had a huge part in making that happen.
I love that. What a way to finish. You nailed the dismount. He's a media expert already. It's honestly kind of annoying given how much we've spent time in this side of the business, and you're in for 1 year. Do a thing. Devin McCourty, former Patriots safety, 3-time Super Bowl champion. Watch him on NBC, hopefully on Peacock with the Bellicast. Love the storytelling. Love the insight. I'm upset you didn't roast me at some point in this podcast. Maybe we'll have you back, and we can make that happen.
There's always love for the ball game. Me, you, J-Mac, Deron Harmon, Matt Slater, Rex Burkhead. It's all about the ball game. So
one of those things is not like the other, but I appreciate the inclusion with all the Super Bowl champions and professional football players. I appreciate it. And like I said, we'll have you back, right?
No problem, man. Sounds good.